So thank you so much, Dan, for joining uh, Design
Pleasure to
Aloud.
be here.
I am really grateful for this, and I was very happy that you were very prompt with the response, and I'm happy that we can do this recording. How are you doing?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really happy to be doing this. And yeah, I'm doing well.
Amazing. Yeah, I've been following you for a long time on LinkedIn, and yeah, I've really enjoyed your reposts, posts, comments, and it was always encouraging, especially for the new designers in the company, in the studio, and they always share things within the Slack group. So yeah, I appreciate it. My first question to you is, how do you introduce yourself without your name or profession?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Also being a little bit introverted, I'm not sure I would, but maybe just talk about some things that I'm interested in. So perhaps I would just say, hey, I like surfing and spicy food, and how about you? I don't know, something
That's
like that
nice.
maybe.
Yeah. I was trying to get warmed up with a bit more of interest, personal interest. And are you based in Tenerife?
No,
No,
it's a place called Tarifa. So
Tarifa.
it
Okay.
sounds similar, but Tenerife is one of the Canary Islands, and Tarifa is on mainland Spain, but it's right at the southern tip of Spain. So facing Morocco, you can see Morocco from Tarifa. It's like just
Oh,
15 kilometers from Africa.
that's amazing. Uh, and do you have surfing spots there? Yeah.
Yeah, we do. So it's also very windy. So we have a lot of windsurfing and kite surfing. And these days, people are doing a lot of foil, like wing foiling. So surfing like on a foil.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also have like just normal surfing. At this time of year is when it starts. So in the summer, it's completely flat and windy. And then in the winter, we have surfing as well. Yeah, that's basically why I live here, is because of all
Mm-hmm.
those the conditions on the ocean, and so just a great place for all those sports.
Yeah, it's a nice thing to do. Nice sport. I wish I could do surfing. Did you have a dream job when you were growing up?
Yeah, I did. Really anything to do with windsurfing. So at one point, I was hoping to be a professional windsurfer. I realized that wasn't really going to happen. I'm very, very bad at competition. I
Right.
get very, very nervous, and I am always so. And I discovered this quite early on in life when I was at school. I was competing and swimming and things like this, and I would always do much worse. The more pressure there was, the worse I would perform. So um, I scrapped that idea, but I still wanted something to do with windsurfing. So my dad windsurfed, and he got me into it when I was a little kid. And so I actually ended up traveling around teaching windsurfing for about 8 years before becoming a designer. So I kind
Wow.
of did a little bit of my dream job when I
Wow,
was a
that's very
kid.
nice. How did you realize this what was the moment when you realized that you were not doing well during competitions or tournaments, these things? I mean, how did that realization happen at such a young age?
It was because I did swimming competitions, and I could swim quite well in like warm-ups and practice. I could see that I was you can kind of know how good you are on the team in the warm-ups, but then when you translate that into like competition swimming, I was really terrible, like one of the worst on the team.
Hmm.
And I was just so nervous, like I would do a really bad start, or I would just like be so nervous that I couldn't really swim properly and just be thinking about the competition. And also I just, the feeling before the competition was so terrible. Like I know for some people, like they get excited and it's kind of like a good excitement. And for me, it was just kind of like nervous dread.
Hmm.
And yeah, so then I never competed. And also even if I did some photo shoots windsurfing for brands, and even that, like the pressure of like somebody got a camera out, and then it's like I just couldn't do any of the tricks, and camera goes away, and then I'm just back to normal again.
I guess it kind of translates to a really bad I wouldn't say corporate job, but just a bad job where maybe you're being micromanaged or just looked upon all the time and there's a pressure on you and then eventually your performance dips. So maybe it's kind of like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I do know that when I'm like under pressure to work on something for a deadline, then I always just put it off until the last minute, and then I do it all like right before the deadline.
Right.
I don't know if that's related at all, but something that it didn't translate to is interviews. So luckily, I don't feel the same pressure and the same nerves for interviews and getting new jobs, which is lucky. I would have thought that it might translate to that, but thankfully not.
That's nice. I think maybe it's a sense of autonomy and doing it your way.
Yeah,
Perhaps. Yeah.
could be.
So how did you go from windsurfing to design? How did that switch happen?
Yeah, so it's actually quite related. So as I said, I traveled around for 8 years. So for 8 years, I was teaching windsurfing and I would travel around to different places. I would work and live in 2 to 3 places every year. And so it was kind of like the life of a nomad. And then I came to this place where I am now, Tarifa, and I did 2 summers here. And then after the second, so I did 1 summer and then I went off to the Caribbean, worked the winter in the Caribbean, because you can't work in the winter as a windsurfing instructor in Europe. And so then I came back here for the summer season. And then that second summer season, I was like, I just like had enough of traveling around and I felt like this is the place I want to live. And so during that second summer season here, I started studying online. So by this point, I was managing the windsurfing school, and then in the night, I was studying design. And so at the end of the summer, my plan was just that when the winter came, I could use design to survive the winter without having to do like really terrible jobs. Because normally, if I didn't have like a winter job or off-season job, I would end up doing like manual laboring, building sites, gardening work, stuff like that. Because I'm like a high school dropout. So at that point, it was the only thing I knew how to do that wasn't just manual laboring was windsurfing. So I was like, okay, I've got to study something and I've got to figure out how to stay in Tarifa off season and not do like really crappy jobs for very little money. So I started studying design online at night whilst managing this windsurfing center. And I offered everybody who I knew that had a business to do a website for them, and mostly just for free. Like I had friends, that were professional. I had a friend who was a professional kite surfer and he wanted like a website to get sponsorship. I was like, yeah, no worries, I'll do that for free. Another friend who had like a kite surf school and I did his website for free. And then I got contacted by a local like company that imported windsurfing, kite surfing products. And they wanted some help with their catalog. They wanted to put their catalog online. So they wanted a website for that. And then a local estate agent, then they asked me to help them with their website and SEO and stuff. And so then it just built from there. And so that I did that first winter, I had these website projects. And then the next summer came around and my plan had been to just carry on running the school. But then I saw that this was just, I had so much work lined up and the money was better and I was really enjoying it. And so then I was just like, hey, you know what, I'm just going to stick with this. And so that's what I did. And that was back in 2007. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, been going ever since.
That's amazing. But I have a question. How did you come across design in the first place when you were looking for things to study upon?
Yeah, I don't know why exactly design. It seemed like the thing that was right. I'd always enjoyed drawing and art as a kid. My mom is an artist. She also worked as an art teacher for a while. I have a grandmother who's an artist. So it kind of, I guess it was in the family. And I knew I didn't want to be like a traditional artist, but I kind of I guess I had that sense for kind of the aesthetic, and digital design seemed like the way to go. So, and it was, so whereas my job these days is more around product design, UX design, when I got into design, it was very much for the visual aspect of it.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I think it was on the rise, because when I started my university in 2008, and I never heard about UX or HCI or design. And when I finished it in 2012, that's when I started. Maybe it came to India a bit later. I don't know.
When I
Yeah,
started, I'd never heard of any of these things either.
yeah,
And really, it was just basically graphic design, but on the web for me anyway. And just stumbled across UX design as I got a little bit deeper into it. Luckily, read some books and found out about things like user testing and actually thinking about breaking down problems rather than just doing stuff that you thought looked good.
that's nice. This is a really inspiring story, to be honest. Stumbling upon things and just enjoying it and loving it, then that becomes beautiful.
Yeah, well, it was a different era back then. So I was
Mhm.
the only web designer or webmaster or whatever we called it back then, webmaster, I guess. I was the only one in my town. So
Yeah,
it was, I tend to avoid posts and advice to like brand new designers that have never had a job yet, because when I look back on what my experience was like, I don't give advice because I think there's really like nothing applicable from what I did to what people are going through now. So I was just like,
hmm,
anybody wanted a website in my town, then they would just talk to me because I was literally the only person in town that could do websites. And it wasn't such a common thing back then to do these kind of deals remotely, like the idea of just, you're based in this small town in Tarifa, I'll just get a web designer in Madrid. Like people didn't really do business like that, without meeting each other and being face to face.
yeah,
So
yeah,
just a huge advantage of just the timing.
absolutely. Speaking of advice, what would you say is an ideal or optimal path for a designer to become good at what they're doing?
Yeah, so one of the things that I always encourage is hard skills first and then soft skills. And it's kind of seems obvious, but there's so much advice floating around for designers that I think nothing is obvious anymore, because there's literally like 20 different things that you should focus on. And at some point you'll want to focus on all of them. So if you carry on being a designer for 10 years, then you probably want to hit all of those things. But the order in which you do it, I think is pretty important. So if you are really just starting out in design, you're in your first job, and you're spending all of your time focusing on product strategy or things like that, and you're not an amazing visual designer, or you don't have amazing technical skills for prototyping or things like that, depending on what's expected of you in the role, then you're going to really struggle, because when you're hired as a junior designer, the first thing you got to make sure you can do is execute on a plan. So there's probably somebody else has got a plan for you. You're not expected to come up with the whole plan and the vision and the strategy. That's probably being done for you because you're hired as a junior. So then what's really fundamental is, can you take this plan that somebody's given you and can you execute efficiently, quickly, something that's usable, visually appealing, clickable, prototype that's ready for user testing, things like that. Can you execute that quickly and efficiently with high quality? If you can, that's an incredible asset for a company to have something like that. So I always encourage people to really concentrate on those hard skills. And if you look at a lot of what design influencers are saying, a lot of the messages, Figma, UX design is not Figma. Figma is just a tool, stuff like that. And it's like, yes, that's true. But if you are just starting out and you're not really good at Figma,
Mhm.
or if there's some other tool that's being used in your company, Sketch or whatever it is, then it could be that, doesn't really matter. But if you're not good at that hard skill of creating those designs, and let's face it, to create the designs you need to learn the tool. So if you haven't gone through those steps and you haven't mastered that, then just ignore that advice. Like, get really good at the tool, get good at the fundamentals of visual design, get good at prototyping. It depends a little bit what your role is. So if your role is more research heavy, then obviously there's a different whole different set of skills. But typically, like junior product designer, you'd want to see those sort of hard skills in place first.
Right. And yeah, I've observed in a lot of let's say interview challenges as well that they heavily focus on the tool itself, how people execute designs in the tool. It's not essentially focused on soft skills, and it's just the process and the way the candidate thinks. But I do get the point of having to master the tool in a sense, because even for me, when I lose or when I don't work, let's say for 6 months in a project, especially in Figma, when I use other tools, Axure, and when I go back to Figma, it's quite hard to just be really efficient with the tool
Yep.
itself.
And I think that if you're finding it very difficult to use that tool, and it's taking you have an idea in your head and it's taking you a really long time to get that idea onto the artboard, it slows down your creativity. It reduces your ability to go through a bunch of different ideas before the kind of fatigue sets in, and you're just, you're like, oh, I'm just over this project now. Like, I've had enough. And you've only been able to express like one idea or two ideas. Whereas if, I kind of compare this to touch typing, right? I can personally, I can type really fast. And that's really helpful for me because I can get my ideas out into a document really quickly before I'm just like, okay, I'm bored of this now. I want to go and like grab something to eat or do something else. By the time that sets in, I've got a lot of ideas out into that document. And with design, it's very similar. It's like if using Figma is like a real barrier to you. You don't know any shortcuts. You don't really know how to use it. You don't know how to use auto layout. You don't know how to do this. But you have like 5 ideas in your head that you want to express. By the time you've expressed the first idea in Figma, like you're over it now. You're like, okay, I'm tired. I've had enough for today. I need a break or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so it really does help as well in your ability to express your ideas visually using the tool that the company expects you to use. If you're good at using that tool, and the only way you get good at using the tool is just putting in the hours.
Mhm.
So that means in a lot of cases, that means doing projects for fun, or it means doing like projects on the side. And I don't encourage people to just, go completely crazy, work 16 hours and burn out. But I mean, to be honest, that's kind of what I did when I was like starting out as a designer. And I know it's a lot of people do that when they're starting out, is you just want to be better than a lot of other designers. You want to be kind of not better than other designers, but you want to stand out and you want to be really good at design. And part of it is just practice, practice, practice. And as you get better at using the tool, you're also hopefully getting better at spacing and typography and all that kind of stuff as well. As you are getting better at the tool, it should go hand in hand as if you're being observant and also studying the fundamentals.
Yeah, it's good to be like really conscious when you are trying these things out on a daily basis. Sometimes it just becomes a pattern of usage that you kind of forget the small nuances, like you said, the paddings or the typography rules, etc. What do you think are the top 5 skill sets required for a designer?
Well, I mean, a lot of people are probably not going to like this answer, but I do think that visual design is probably right up there as one of the top skills you should master. And I know there are a lot of UX designers that don't really need visual design traditionally, so they are working more on sort of problem solving and research, and maybe they're doing wireframes and Xura and they're not expected to do visual design. I think that the era that we're in right now, though, that's becoming less and less prominent, that role. I'm sure it could just be my experience, and my experience is always in the smaller startups, and it could be that in very big sort of enterprise companies and like maybe in government roles, medical roles, I'm sure that's still a thing. So I'm sure I have blind spots, but for me, visual design is really key. Understanding your users and the different methods to which you might understand users. So that's kind of like an umbrella statement, understanding users. So within that, it could be getting good at interviewing users, getting good at like asking questions that are not leading questions, that are not introducing your own bias. So that's sort of like the art of interviewing users, being able to read data, being able to analyze data effectively. So when you're looking at a funnel, are you segmenting it by the user base that's actually applicable to this feature that you're working on? That sort of thing. So sort of an understanding of how to analyze data, and then thinking a little bit outside of the sort of standard ways. Are you looking at reviews in the App Store? Are you digging through support chats? Just like really trying to get the voice of the customer from different angles. So that skill set, understanding users, definitely a big one. Understanding the business that you work in. So understanding business in general, I think is very important for designers, but also within that area is understanding the specific business that you work in, and understanding, if I design this screen better, what does that mean? Like an increased conversion rate here, what does that feed into? What's the sort of business indicator, what the business KPI that affects? So understanding really how your design fits into that business where you work. Then I would say effective communication.
Right.
So this is super important for getting you a job as a designer, for keeping you in that job as a designer, for getting you a promotion as a designer, for helping your company understand why you're designing this thing and why it's valuable. So it's design is communication, and how you communicate your designs and your thinking is really fundamental to your growth as a designer and your effectiveness. And then lastly, I would say systems thinking. So I mean, this could be a lot of things. So understanding, better systems for working. So better systems for exploring problems, but it could also be design systems. So being able to design things in a way that's consistent and scalable. So yeah, those are my top 5. I think visual design, understanding users, understanding the business you work in, effective communication, and systems thinking.
I was curious about the business aspect, and especially since you mentioned that you work with a lot of startups. How do you negotiate the business value versus your design decisions? Because right now, at what I've observed at Studio and elsewhere is with young startups or early startups, it's really hard for people to convince, let's say, the clients or the businesses to take a step back and think about long-term business goals rather than short-term quick UI fixes or UI decisions that happen usually. So how do you balance that or negotiate that?
Yeah, so I think there's always a bit of like push and pull between design and business. So often design is talking about things that are like hard to quantify, design quality, and we should make this look good, or for accessibility, like, this is the right thing to do. And we struggle to convert that language into something that the business cares about. And so one way I think that's helpful to think about this is that there's two ways that you need to talk about this. There are either business opportunities or they are risks to the business. And it's very good to just frame everything you're talking about in one or both of those aspects. So if we talk about, instead of quality of our design work, we can talk about the risk to the brand by putting out something that's not consistent with the brand. And then you can start to talk about, okay, well, what happens if what is this risk to our brand? What is the domino effect of that? And then, so that's a lack of trust. And if there's a lack of trust, there's going to be a lack of signups, and there's the word of mouth will reduce, and et cetera, et cetera. Or with accessibility, the risk there is that you get sued in some cases. And the opportunity is that we have untapped markets. So you need to try and quantify the number of users that might have impaired vision, that are using the site, that then won't be able to find these CTAs, won't have a clear path towards subscribing or whatever it is. So always just kind of bear in mind, what's the risk if we don't do this, or if we don't fix this, and what's the opportunity if we do this? And yeah, that's the way I always try and think about it.
Yeah, that's a helpful tip. Helpful way to think. Yeah, business opportunities and business risks. Yeah. Can you share some tips and tricks for designers to get better? It could be like early stage as well as like senior designers.
Yeah, so I guess for the thing that I touched on earlier for hard skills, the time when I have learned the quickest is when I've been really excited about designing something, and I've had a little bit of sort of creative freedom over the thing that I'm designing. And that has come a lot of the time from just designing things for free. So, and it can be difficult, like if you're working all day as a designer and perhaps the thing that you're designing doesn't really give you any creative freedom, because perhaps you're working inside a very mature design system, or it's just a boring, unappealing product visually, which a lot of designers are kind of stuck in that world where you're working on something that's just, I don't know, a bunch of forms for something enterprise, and it's not that captivating for you. I think in that situation, if you want to get better at your visual design and your technical skills, sometimes you just have to design something for fun, something that you might not get paid for. And not always, don't let everything you do be a transaction for money, because often that kind of stifles all the creative design. And some people will use perhaps their portfolio as an outlet for that. But if you're early on in your career, you maybe don't have a lot of content to put in your portfolio. So you can't really, it can't be this sort of rich experience when you're designing it. So what I did early on would be just design like websites for free for people. And I would continue to do that just because it was fun for me. So now I'm 16, 17 years into my career. I've designed a lot of websites for people. It's that's not my idea of fun anymore. But for a long time, that really was my idea of fun, was like, I would just love to design a new website for somebody. So find that thing that's fun for you, whether it's like designing a website or just an app that you would use yourself, or a logo for somebody, or whatever it is, an icon set that you give away for free or you try and sell. But find something that you think would be really fun to design, and just go and design that thing. And then it will help you get better at design in a way that if you're enjoying it, it's something that you find really fun, it'll help you get better at design, and it also might turn into something that you can put on your portfolio as well. So that's kind of like the hard skills. The soft skills, a lot of it is just being intentional. So sometimes just how you share your work you don't think of that as a skill, right? You think of doing the work as the skill. And then all you got to do is just post a link in Slack and just be like, hey, I did this thing. Can you check it out? Give me some feedback. And it's really just being intentional. It's thinking about how should I share my work? Are there like frameworks out there, or what kind of feedback do I want? And what should I communicate in order to get the feedback that I want? And so just being really intentional about it. So some things that I've talked about is when you share your work, make sure you provide context. So where does this fit in? If it's something to do with onboarding, like what is onboarding and why is it important? How do we define onboarding at this company? What's the problem this work is trying to solve? What are the business opportunities that this redesign creates? What stage is this at? So are we just getting ready to like hand this over to engineering? So we're kind of almost done? Or am I just at the beginning of the project and I I'm gathering data and I've done some rough designs, but I'm open to all kinds of ideas. So really just approaching these things very intentionally and understanding that as you become more of a senior designer, or you're aspiring to be a senior designer, it's not just doing that design bit that's your job. It's everything now is part of being a better designer. It's how you present your work. It's how you share ideas with people. It's how you give feedback. So have you ever studied how to give feedback? Like, do you have a framework for giving feedback? So it's like all these little things which, when at the beginning of the call, I said, there's like 20 things that you can get better at. I mean, there's probably more than that, but that's what I mean, where it's overwhelming if, as a junior designer, you decide that you're going to get good at all of these things at the same time as you start your career. It's just too much, and you'll probably just be average at everything and never good at one thing. But as you become a senior designer, then you've really got to look into all of these different areas and try and improve in all these different areas.
I think probably it kind of I could relate this statement of not just doing the work but presenting it with the podcast that I'm doing. It doesn't just end with recording the podcast. I have to be very intentional about the distribution part of it as well. Like, how does the marketing material look like? How do I schedule it? What content do I need to write? So I totally get the point of having to present your work and gathering feedback, or using that data and then improving, iterating on whatever you're doing. So totally get that. Does it kind of circle back to, I'm just curious, does it circle back to having a mindset of systems thinking, this idea of wholeness?
I'm not sure. I mean, I guess if you zoom out, there's always a system there. So I think systems thinking is applicable to everything. So you could say that you're getting good at requesting feedback is, improving your inputs. Improving your inputs will improve the outcome. Could be, yeah. But I think for me, the big shift is when I realized that if I just keep studying how to be better at visual design or how to be better at using this tool, there was going to be less and less return professionally for that. So there comes a point in your career at the beginning where there's just you don't know, right at the beginning, you have no idea how to translate an idea in your head into, let's say, a prototype that is effective at solving the problem and also visually appealing, and it's interactive and somebody can click through it and they can understand this idea in your head. It's not just they can grasp this idea because they've just performed the whole thing in this interactive prototype you created. Like, that's an incredible skill to have, right? And most people on this planet cannot do that. They can't take an idea and make it into an interactive prototype. So if you've never used the design tool before, the return on investment is huge to be able to get you to that point. But at some point, like, you've been doing this for a few years, at some point, if you want to grow your career and you want to grow as a professional, and what you're doing is just trying to get better and better at that, there's going to be the return on your investment is very, very weak. And then you start to think, okay, well, I still want to grow. I still want to get better at stuff. I still want to learn. Like, what should I learn now? And then you start to realize that there's a whole bunch of stuff that you need to learn to grow as a designer, but none of these things are really design related. So there's this like shift that has to happen where you've got to spend a good part of your time studying things to be a better designer that are not design things. And so that's kind of the shift that I think has to happen to be a better designer. And you just got to know, you got to feel when the timing is right for that. So yeah.
So there's no framework as such, like, okay, after 2 years, you need to start expanding your skill set. So it just based on your work and your experience, and you have this moment where you saturated moment where you feel like I need to expand my skills.
Yeah, and I think so. And I think you'll kind of feel when it's quite easy and efficient for you to translate that idea into something visual and interactive. And it's like, okay, well, that was easy, but that's kind of like the easiest part of my day now. Now, stakeholder management is actually much more difficult for me. Or this colleague of mine who's more junior than me, like, they really need my advice. I can accelerate, like, they're not doing that well, and I know I can accelerate their growth and help them perform much better in this project and be a better designer. But I'm not really sure how to approach that situation and how to give them feedback in a way that's going to be constructive and not piss them off. So then you're thinking, actually, that's the more difficult problem for me to solve right now than taking an idea and turning it into an interactive prototype. It's like, I've done that 1,000 times now. That's actually really simple. It doesn't involve a lot of complex decision making for me. But now there's all these other things that I'm expected to do, and they're much more complicated for me. And I haven't studied how to do them, and I don't have a sort of a framework for how to approach them. And I think you just find over time that shift happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think what also happens to designers is there's like a little bit of hesitation to just go out and learn these things, because it's like, well, I didn't, I'm not here to learn how to give feedback. Like, I'm here to just do designs, and that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
feel part of your job anymore. So that can be a little bit of also a hesitation to really like step out of your comfort zone and start to learn things that maybe you were never interested in to begin with. But at some point you realize, well, I have a choice now. Like, I either stay kind of stuck and limited in my growth, or I learn these things, and they might not be the things that I necessarily find super interesting, but I know that if I don't learn these things, I don't dig into them, then I won't grow as a designer, and I'll be less effective as a designer. So you kind of have to embrace it.
Totally agree. And I feel like giving feedback or receiving feedback, learning how to give feedback, these skill sets, or let's say doing fun projects on the side, like you mentioned. I think these kind of skill sets help doing the design itself with your client project. It kind of reflects back to your original work or doing the design itself. I think all these other skill sets kind of aid to the design skill set itself.
Yep.
Yeah. So I want to go to a very specific topic now, which is problem solving.
Yeah.
How can we How can we encourage designers these days to be a better problem solver? And the reason I ask this is because I've observed a lot of designers where they've gotten accustomed to a lot of the standardized processes, and it's I think we touched upon this earlier. It's hard for them to be creative when there's a solid design system or a solid standardized process that the client needs. with a deadline, and how can designers become better problem solvers and think more creatively? Yeah, that's what I'm going at.
Yeah, sure. It's a topic I like a lot. I recently gave a talk about this. And so the way I like to break it down is I think about solving problems or problem solving depths in like 3 depths. So the very shallow surface level designer is not really solving any problems at all. They're just being given a solution and you design the solution. So, hey, I want you to design a form. It's going to have these fields and I want you to design it like this, and this should be a radio, and this should be a checkbox, and I want a button that says send. And so you're given this sort of like product spec. It's exactly what you need to design, and you design it, and that's kind of like the surface level designer. And there's nothing wrong with that because you get to really focus on visual design, and some people really enjoy that and specialize in that, and you become like a UI designer. And that's fine. And those people typically, if that's the level you're working at, they won't be solving problems, but they will get better and better at visual design and transitions and just animations and stuff. And then the next level down is and this is what most of us aspire to, and this is really where most of design occurs, or UX design or product design occurs, where you get given a problem. And so it could be, hey, the conversion rate on this form is pretty low. Can you do something about it? And so nobody's telling you what to design. They're giving you a problem. And so you go and look at the data and you design a new solution. Maybe you break the form up into 3 steps and you try to remove some fields, and then you do some user testing, and you do some user testing on the original, you do some testing on the new design, you compare, and you come up with the solution. And then there's like a third level of design where you really go back to what the user is trying to achieve. So like, what is the user trying to achieve, and can I do something that removes this problem completely? So like, they never even have to have this problem. So in the case of the form, like, can we just get them to use the product straight away? And when they want to save something, then we ask, hey, give us your email address to save your progress. And then they can save their progress. And then if they want to use this thing that they created again, maybe they can like fill out a few more details to carry on using it or something. So actually, this long form that you're asked to design in that first step, we didn't even need it to get them to use the product and reach the aha moment, because we can just save the product, the thing that they're creating in local storage, and then ask them to their email address to save it permanently. So kind of an example where you have surface level, you're completely directed. You solve the second level, you solve the immediate problem that you're being given. And then third level is that you really you think very deeply about what the user needs. You really understand the motivation of the user. Hey, they just want to create this thing on my service, and they don't actually want to fill out a form. So let's give them what they want and not make them fill out a form at all, because that's not what they want. That's not what they're here for. So there's kind of like these 3 levels. And the third level is this sort of designer's innovation.
Yeah, I was curious about this innovation aspect of it. I feel like it's a very alternate approach to what you usually think. And how do you, as a designer, think about such solutions or be innovative? One, in generally, but also 2, when let's say you don't have access to a lot of the users, what do you do in that case?
Yeah. So if you don't have access to the users, I think it's incredibly difficult, because the way to use design as an innovation, as innovation, is to deeply understand the user's motivation, like what they want from the service. If you don't understand that deeply, then you're at risk of just guessing and creating something new, which is going to be difficult and costly and time consuming, and you're just doing it on a guess, and then that will fail, and then design will be blamed for wasting all this money. and you'll be in a worse position than when you start where you started from. And I guess to sort of answer the original question was like, how do you get better at problem solving? So probably the most practical way is to have a set of questions to ask at the beginning of a project. So something that I call a discovery framework. So for instance, the questions are like, what is the problem for the user? And can you describe that problem for the user in their own voice? So it's not enough to just guess. Can you go away and get the voice of the customer where they've expressed they have this problem? So back to what I was talking about, the skill of understanding your users. Can you find some like interview transcripts where they talked about this problem? Can you see an app review where they expressed this problem? And really bring the voice of the customer into this project right at the beginning. So that's the first question. What's the problem for the user? Can you describe it in their own words? Who has this problem? So do we know who the user is? And that could be, it could be demographics, the typical stuff that goes into personas, but it could be something like users that have used the app for more than 3 months typically have this problem, or users on their first day, or users on this paid subscription, or it could be anything that helps describe the sort of user that would have the problem.
Right.
Talk about how do we know it's a real problem? So how do we make sure that we're not just guessing that this is a problem? Like, do we have some data to back it up? Do we have some, I don't know, like a dashboard that shows poor conversion rates, something like that? Why do we think the problem occurs? So what assumptions do we need to verify about why the problem occurs? So, I think that the conversion rate is low because the form is too long. So now we have an assumption, we can create a hypothesis. If we had a shorter form, the conversion rates would be better. So now we have an idea of what to go and solve.
Right.
But we always have to remember these, unless we've tested them, we have real data, these are just assumptions. So we need to verify them, and before we invest too much, and like never invest too much in unverified assumptions. Yeah, so it's just having a sort of, and also like, what's the business problem? So either what's, back to that like risk and opportunity, what's the risk to our business if we don't solve this, or like what's the opportunity that we're trying to uncover by solving this?
Yeah, interesting. And how do you validate usually these hypotheses? Is it just through usability testing, or is there any other way where people can validate? And the second part of the question is, I feel like these methods would take a really long time, if I'm not wrong. Is there like a specific time frame that you recommend to validate certain hypotheses?
Well, I think it depends a little bit on the type of business that you're working in. So if you are an agency doing client work, then probably your timelines are much shorter. With the environment that I work in, it's a startup, and basically everything is just running forever. So then what it comes down to is the importance of the thing that you're working on, and the risk to the business of getting it wrong. So sometimes and so for this, there's I wish I could remember the researcher's name, Jeanette Fruccello or something. She has this matrix where you can understand like how much research is needed. So basically, if you imagine there's like this quadrant, and in the quadrant where it's like low risk, high clarity, so we understand a lot about this problem and it's very low risk, then you can just kind of move fast and not spend too much time on this research and experimentation. But then if it's very low clarity and high risk for the business, then you flip that around, and you really need to feel a lot more certain. And then that's where you do a lot of research, you do a lot of testing, maybe you release first to like a small group of people. But back to your question before, like, how do you measure, how do you test the hypothesis, and is it just usability testing? It could be usability testing. So you could have like the baseline, so you have a mock-up of the current form, and you have the new one, and you do usability testing. But it all really depends as well how rapidly you're able to iterate in production. So this is a little bit down to your engineering capabilities, how quickly they're able to move, whether you have the technology in place to like make a change, release it to like 1% of your users and get feedback. So it's like the engineering team, the capability to release to a small stream of users, but also the ability to actually measure changes and isolate those changes and capture that data. So it's all like, all of that is very complicated, not very complicated, but it's all a sign of a sort of a more mature product when they're able to do all of those things. And then there's also just experiments that people set up, like a fake door experiment or something like that. So yeah, so there's all sorts of things. There's also just getting people to, sending out a form for people to fill in. That could be a way to verify a hypothesis that, people want product X. You just send out a form saying, hey, would you like to be on the beta list for this feature? And then you kind of get some data on whether people are interested or not.
Yeah, I think especially I've observed in LinkedIn that especially for people who are trying to find a job, their first job, let's say, I really admire when they kind of post their findings or designs and then just ask for feedback. I think that's also a really good way of one, gathering feedback, but also seeing ways to improve your own design.
Yeah.
When you don't specifically have access to a lot of the platforms at that stage.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. As long as they're actually posting like a little bit of context and a link to the entire design. And I've often given some feedback on stuff like that. If it's just like two screenshots side by side, which UI is better, and you have to vote with no context, then it's quite annoying.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. Yeah. And when you spoke about business opportunities and the risks, does storytelling or storyboarding, let's say, play a crucial role in these phases or in the whole problem solving phase? I'm asking this specifically from a very artistic point of view, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, storytelling has a huge role in design. And I don't know if you follow Jeff White on LinkedIn, but he has a whole course for storytelling for designers now, which I think is a good testament to how important this is as a skill for designers. It's a skill that will help you get hired in the first place. So when you do a case study presentation, or even when you just write a case study, you are telling a story there. So and stories are, as old as humanity. Well, basically as old as our civilizations are older, it's storytelling. And so after all those years of telling stories, we kind of know what makes a good story and what the sort of key ingredients are. So I think it's a great skill to learn, just to be able to get a job, but also, as you said, with when you're talking to stakeholders, it's great to be able to tell a story in a format that's sort of captivating and is going to keep their attention if you want them to invest and see the value in this project that you're working on, for sure. And I imagine for agencies, it's it's absolutely critical to keep people engaged and motivated in this design work that you're doing for them, because in the end, what you're doing when you're designing for that client is you're telling them a story about the transformation that their brand is going to go through, and it should be an interesting story and not one. It shouldn't be a sad story or a boring story. It should be an exciting story with a happy ending.
Yeah, and I've seen, we went to a really nice design festival in Berlin. It's called Forward. And there were a lot of agencies there presenting their case studies and their work. And it was really amazing to see how they told their stories in a very creative way. So I totally agree that it just captivates, and I think the point of it is to persuade or sell your work in a way. And if you want to get an interview, it's very good to have the skill set. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just going to add that sometimes the traditional storytelling format that you might learn when you're a kid at school, where you do like an intro and then the main part of the story and then a conclusion, can also work against you, especially when you have like a research paper. A UX researcher presents, this sort of intro of like giving you the context and here's why we're doing the research, and then it talks about the research itself and how we performed the research and all the details about it, and then at the end is the conclusion. And sometimes you really need to just break the script, and what I encourage instead is just put the conclusion and the recommendations at the top, so that people that want to read the rest, it's just because they're genuinely interested in how research is performed. But that most people at a company are just like, I just want to know what you're recommending, or what the conclusion was. I don't need to read all of this stuff. So I think you really got to understand there's like a time and place for different story structures as well.
Interesting. That's a very interesting thing. I've never heard of this. Like, so for example, by conclusion, you mean, let's say, hey, through my work, I increased the conversion rate by 12% for this particular feature in this product. So that you put that on the top.
Yeah, exactly. So leading with sort of impact, where it's like exactly like you said, this was the conversion rate. Before it was this, now it's this. Here's a before and after visual, and then you get into sort of the context, how you did it, etc., because and this can be good for portfolio case studies. It can be good for UX researchers, because sometimes people will just skim and they'll be like, okay, that's good enough for me, and they don't actually want to read the case study. They kind of, from that bit of data and from that visual, maybe they got enough. It's like, that data and that visual, they can probably see, okay, this is interesting. So this person was effective at increasing the conversion rate of onboarding. So they know a little bit about growth design. The designs look good. They understand the data that's important. That's fine. That's enough for me to talk to this person. Or maybe they do want to read, everything about the case study. But yeah, just kind of make it skimmable and also readable. So like the two things are on offer. Whereas if you put all the conclusion, the impact is at the end, like a lot of these design boot camps, that structure will tell you to do it. Like if it's all at the end, then you're forcing people to read it. Whereas if you put it at the beginning, you're giving them the option. It's like either you can get all the important stuff at the beginning and read it if you want, or you can just get the important stuff.
Absolutely. And apart from Jeff White's course, do you recommend any other ways to master storytelling or learn more about storytelling?
Well, I really like the Minto pyramid. So this is a little bit, that's basically what I was just talking about now, is that idea of putting that important stuff up front is the principle of Minto pyramid. And yeah, so it's like you lead with the answer first. So you make your recommendations right away, and then you support that with like key facts and insights. That's kind of like the next bit of the pyramid. And then the base of the pyramid is you back up these key insights with like the detailed data, the analysis, the evidence, and all that stuff. So yeah, I guess I would recommend for anybody that's interested in this to look at Minto's pyramid. This is developed by somebody called Barbara Minto, and her writing on it is very interesting.
Lovely. Okay, I will plug these links at the end. So we're in the final act, let's say. Thank you for sharing the bits on problem solving. It was really useful.
Pleasure.
Can you share some nice anecdotes that are, I would say, completely unrelated to design, maybe to do with your windsurfing or any of your adventures that can be an inspiration for designers to think about?
So not an anecdote, but one of the sort of quotes or chapters from a design book that I really like that goes back to that idea of design as innovation is from the book, I think it's from The Design of Everyday Things.
Mhm.
And there's this concept, this quote really for marketing is that that people don't want to buy a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole. And so it's this idea that is very effective in landing page design, which is, don't sell people the features, sell them the sort of the benefit or the outcome. So in this case, like don't sell them the drill bit, sell them the hole.
Mhm.
And another way to look at this is like a great way that I've seen this expressed is like you don't sell Mario the flower, you sell Mario the superpowers. If you played,
Interesting.
if you've ever played Super Mario, you know it.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
and so that's great, and it works for landing pages, but it doesn't get at it gets at the problem solving things. It's like, hey, here's your problem solved. You get a hole in the wall, or you get superpowers, but it doesn't get at that innovation point. And in the book, The Design of Everyday Things, Don Norman has this quote and this passage in the book where he's talking about like, well, why would anybody want a hole in their wall? Like that's still an intermediate goal. And, that's not like the end goal that you just want a hole in your wall. He says probably like maybe they want like bookshelves. So if they could have a bookshelf that didn't require a hole in the wall, then that would probably be better. Like, then they wouldn't have to have a hole in the wall, or even like books that don't need bookshelves, or digital books. So I really love that concept where he took something that it makes a lot of sense. Don't sell people a drill bit, sell them the hole in the wall. And that's a fantastic concept for marketing something. And then he really shows you the power of understanding what users want, what their motivations are, and takes it further and really talks about how innovation really stems from this deep understanding of our users' needs.
Yeah, understanding, let's say, the psychographics of the users and asking the question of at what point did you think that you needed this, let's say, tool or feature or whatever. I think that's a really good question to ask to understand the underlying motivation. Good. Do you recommend any other books apart from The Design of Everyday Things?
Yeah, let's go for books on two different levels. So, I talked a lot about the importance of hard skills, visual design. So for that, I really recommend a book by Adham, Dannaway, and it's called Practical UI. And that is a fantastic book it's just an amazing guide for your visual design. And then the other book, so to like go to a completely different level, is a book called When Coffee and Kale Compete. And I believe there's a free version online somewhere as well, which is great. And this is about jobs to be done theory. So this is more about how to make sure that everything you design relates back to what's called in jobs to be done theory. It's called the customer's desire for transformation. So that sort of giving them the transformation they're looking for. So in that previous example, the transformation they're looking for wasn't a hole in the wall. The transformation they were looking for was like some beautiful bookshelves.
Right. Yeah. Super. I will type these as well. Thank you for sharing these. Any other initiatives or closing thoughts that you would like to share with the listeners?
No, I think covered most of it. I guess if there's one thing that I would like to kind of make clear is that although I recommend a lot of these sort of hard skills at the beginning, visual design and stuff, ultimately what I think design is about is creating that deep understanding of what your users, your customers, what they're looking for, and finding the sort of most innovative and transformative ways to give them that solution, and in ways that overlap with business needs as well. So
Absolutely.
it's that interplay between customer needs and the business objectives is what you're aiming for.
Absolutely. And I really liked it when you said being intentional. I think it is a very underrated word. I think being intentional is really good, and it makes you a bit more conscious of things. I think that's needed to understand users deeply.
Yeah, great.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dan, for this chat. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me
Really did.
too. Thank you
There's
for
a
having
lot.
me.
Yeah, there's a lot of highlights we can share from this podcast. And yeah, thank
Great.
you so much.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Really fun.